back to this channel. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss any future updates. Today we're looking back in the past year of 2024 and to the year ahead of 2025. 2025 has a few ominous predictions from some of the biggest criminals on earth imaginable. So let's get into it. Operation Lockstep was written by the Rockefeller Foundation in 2010. In it, it predicted that the Chinese technocratic capitalists that run China would lock down their country first and the rest of the world would follow their example. Many in the communist movement are effectively Dengist apologists for Chinese capitalism. However, China is married to the Western imperialists by a million threads. They both exploit their working class, and as Stalin has previously pointed out, ties by class are much more tight than ties by nation. And by 1945, most of the world bourgeois class was cosmopolitan in nature. They'd discarded their nation.
Раньше буржуазия считалась главой нации. Она отстаивала права и независимость нации, ставя их превыше всего. Теперь не осталось и следа от национального принципа. Теперь буржуазия продает права и независимость наций за доллары. Знамя национальной независимости и национального суверенитета выброшено за борт. Нет сомнения, что это знамя придется поднять вам, представителей коммунистических и демократических партий, и понести его вперед. Если хотите быть патриотами своей страны, если хотите стать руководящей силой нации, его никому больше не.
The piece in Operation Lockstep we're interested in, though, is the acknowledgement that they could not lock down everyone and control everyone all of the time, and that by 2025 they would need to let up the pressure. In real time, though, the need to let off pressure from the working class was earlier than 2025, as pushback to the lockdowns and the draconian measures waged against the working class were becoming more apparent. However, a few countries did fare better, China in particular. The Chinese government's quick imposition and enforcement of mandatory quarantine for all citizens, as well as its instant and near hermetic sealing off of all borders saved millions of lives, stopped the spread of the virus far earlier than in other countries, and enabling a swifter post-pandemic recovery. The second item on our agenda regarding 2025 is the infamous Deagle report. The Deagle website was an innocuous CIA-tied website that makes predictions on demographic growth for the US military-industrial complex. In the early teens, the website went viral across the internet for depicting massive depopulation of Western nations. Many speculated on the reason for the mass depopulation at the time. My own belief is because of the amount of people that visited Maxine and NATO provoking a world war to cover up its crimes during Schmovid. We can see the population of USA go from 326 million down to 99 million. Italy and France are practically cut in half, and the United Kingdom goes down to a stunning 15 million people. The bourgeoisie have access to numerous amounts of AI data and analytical models that normal people simply do not. Deagle.com provided an explanation of sorts at the bottom of their webpage, and whilst they did mention viruses, Ebola to be specific, they insisted that no pandemic or nuclear war factored into their assessment. Deagle then highlighted as their key element that the USA during the 20th century had unprecedented immigration, which brain drained the rest of the world to the USA's benefit. Quote, the collapse of the Western financial system will wipe out the standard of living of its population while ending Ponzi schemes such as the stock exchange and the pension funds. The population will be hit so badly by a full array of bubbles and Ponzi schemes that the migration engine will start to work in reverse, accelerating itself due to ripple effects, thus leading to the demise of the state. This unseen situation for the states will develop itself into a cascade pattern with unprecedented and devastating effects for the economy. Jobs offshoring will surely end, with many American corporations relocating overseas, thus becoming foreign corporations. We see a significant part of the American population migrating to Latin America and Asia, while migration to Europe suffering a similar illness won't be relevant. Nevertheless, the death toll will be horrible. 2024 was also the triumph of eugenics by the most depraved part of oligarchical finance capital, the imperialist bourgeoisie. As the imperialists remain triumphant, the upper class is utterly infected with a bitter and cynical and diseased view of humanity as a form of cancer. Canada became a testing ground to proliferate the idea of a right to die. This is now spread to Britain. I'm grateful I covered these articles linking the increasingly depraved Western culture to eugenics in my scientific killings articles. I'll probably put those pamphlets on Amazon at some point. The 2024 Paris Olympics was a display of bourgeois perversion that felt the need to mock one of the most famous paintings in Christianity. I made a prediction I'm still quite proud of, that if you know history, it's not that hard of a prediction to make. Just as the rapacious and decadent Roman Empire before it, the British Empire, like a horde of locusts, stripped the rest of the world of its produce, destroyed commerce and industry, and turned the entire world into a slave labour, poppy farm and opium den on the other hand. Romans had used cults of Dionysus and Isis to pacify and brainwash populations they held in thrall, addicted to immediate sense sensations and the worship of ecstasy, drugs and sex. These cults mirror today's YOLO and sex, drugs, rock and roll / gangster rap culture, all manufactured in Tavistock Institute and Stanford Research Institute. Just as Stanford Research Institute wrote in The Changing Images of Man in 1982, how they would need to mould the population into a post-industrial man, they needed to remove the possibility of technical advancement, industrial progress, economic growth, and replace it with the green death cult where people get used to Boeing planes falling out of the sky. Poisoned water supplies and the celebration of nihilism, hedonism as a substitute for progress. A few days after I wrote that Telegram post, the official Olympics ran their degenerate opening ceremonies, openly celebrating Dionysus. It was not a hard prediction to make. If you read the Stanford Research Institute book, Changing Images of Man, you understand why they have to divert humanity into drugs, sex, and other frivolous activities as a substitute for progress. And as a substitute for raising a family. You see the effects of bourgeois feminism that it has had on the image of man. In this context, I insist that humanity will increasingly decline into barbarism until a brutal event like World War II wipes God knows how many people off the earth. It took World War II to rid the world of the eugenics programs that were operating in Germany as early as 1920s. For me, therefore, the French Olympics is a massive portent of doom and hard times to come. The Scottish Smovid inquiry gets a mention here. The Scottish Smovid inquiry has taught us the utter depravity being pushed onto the working class during the Smovid event. They needed enough dead bodies to show statistics for a pandemic. The British government, working in absolute concert with the rest of bourgeois governments, then set about murdering their own people. This is a thin sliver of the testimonies from the Scottish Smovid inquiry.
Into your ground.
That's correct.
And can you just explain how you came by that information?
We had heard that there was a possibility that there was a do not resuscitate order. After my grandmother had died, we'd heard from the solicitors that there was talk that there was a do not resuscitate order in my grand's file, but nobody had ever seen it, so we didn't know the full facts of it. But when I actually sat with the inquiry team to give this statement, my solicitor produced the do not resuscitate order, and it had my name on it, and it was dated on the 2nd of November. And it, sorry? I've got a copy of it, but it's kind of block capital letters with my name.
So in other words, not your normal signature?
Not my signature at all.
And skin hungry, with no cuddles or hands to hold. Perhaps they would be paraded out behind glass like an exhibit at a reptile museum or a prisoner.
I was angry because the things that I read in his notes wasn't what the doctors were saying to me on a daily basis. The doctors were lying to me on a daily basis. Nurses were lying to me on a daily basis. Everything that was in my brother's notes was different from what I was being told on a daily basis.
I think you say at paragraph 25 that he developed a ventilator-associated pneumonia, or VAP.
Yeah, so
is that something you found out afterwards?
Yeah, so I had a friend whose husband had also been in hospital with COVID, and he was on maximum oxygen for 3 weeks. So what I couldn't understand is why the ventilator was being pushed on my brother, because I didn't at that time. I didn't know about all the infections he had. He'd also gained like over 4 stone in weight, which was fluid, and they told us it was only inflammation. The funeral directors was the ones that says to me, they says they used to have a thing called like a cremation form 4 or something. If they had an issue with the cause of death, which was on the death certificate, then they would get in touch with us people or whatever, they'd tick a box. And I asked them directly, I says, if you still had the forms, if they still existed today, because they done away with them, they stopped doing them, I says, would you have ticked that box to say that you've got a concern with the cause of death of my brother's death certificate? And he says to me, yes.
Aye, that's what I says to him. I says, my mum's no dying of COVID. My mum's dying of starvation and dehydration. And you just had to look at my mum, see that, her eyes were sunk right into the back of her head. All I kept thinking was, they must have given her a jag there somewhere. But at that time, I hadn't come out about my dad. I was always under the impression they were giving my mum morphine because I'd fought with them not to give my mum stuff, and then they'd get social work involved, and standby social work. You can't get social work for love nor money, but they managed to get them in a bank holiday weekend to call me and say, because I did say it, I said, you give my mum palliative care medicines, I'm getting you charged with murder if anything happens to my mum. But we weren't allowed in. We weren't allowed to do anything. We weren't allowed to interact. We were deprived, and the people, my mum was deprived of everything. It's natural. A cuddle, a hug, time. She was deprived of all these things.
Now, you're in the NHS. You should know that we know what happened. You should consider blowing the whistle and telling as many people as you can what happened during that period. We had the BlackRock, Patsy and CIA Azovite assassin Ryan Ruth attempt to murk Donald Trump. The Russian SMO into Ukraine flipped the tables as the root of modern-day Nazism. The root doesn't find its base in the conservative movement, but in the ultra-liberal movement. Who can forget the transgender Sarah Ashton Cirillo being the spokesman for the Ukrainian armed forces and Azovites in Ukraine?
Vladimir Putin, you are already in hell. We are counting your days down now. Your fascism, your totalitarianism will not get a monument, Vladimir Putin! Slava Ukraini.
The root of modern white supremacism today is in the liberal left who are fused with NATO and Nazis in Ukraine. If you've been following my Operation Gladio series, you'll know that NATO worked hand in glove throughout the entire Cold War with fascists, and now NATO is working hand in glove with Azovite Nazis in Ukraine, as NATO has become woke alongside imperialist society itself. These new cosmopolitan identities are created to give a sense of community to completely atomized people that have nothing in common with each other anymore, except their collective subjugation of the world under imperialism. 2024 was the year of utter barbaric depravity by Israel. Let's not forget that Israel's society turned a man that was sodomizing Palestinians into a TV celebrity. As Israel continued its ethnic cleansing of Gaza, it won big with the collapse of Syria and began biting chunks out of Syria. This has been a big blow to the Palestinian resistance and to Russia in their fight against NATO. If the NATO-aligned criminals manage to topple Iran, they can make energy flows conditional to China on severing ties with Russia, and that'll be the end of Russia. I pray that doesn't happen. With the election of Donald Trump, the threat of new viruses has come onto the horizon. Peter Hotez has previously called for the NATO troops to occupy the United States against so-called anti-vaxxers.
Fortunately, I have to give you a very long, I don't know the answer to your question answer, because it is very complicated. And quite honestly, the health sector doesn't know what to do, because this is now first and foremost a political problem. And what I've said to the Biden administration is the health sector can't solve this on its own. We're going to have to bring in Homeland Security, the Commerce Department, Justice Department to help us understand how to do this. And I've said the same I met with Dr. Tedros last month in Geneva, WHO, the Director General, to say, I don't know that the World Health Organization can solve this on our own. We need the other United Nations agencies, NATO. This is a security problem because it's no longer a theoretical construct or some arcane academic exercise. 200,000 Americans died because of anti-vaccine aggression, anti-science aggression. And so this is now a lethal force that, and now I feel as a pediatric vaccine scientist, it's just as though it's important, just as it's important for me to make new vaccines to save lives, the other side of saving lives is countering this anti-vaccine aggression.
And now he's back at it, insisting that a new pandemic will start.
Here's the reason why we need to care about this stuff, Nicole, is that we have some big picture stuff coming down the pike starting on January 21st. Mr. Bloomberg mentioned H5N1. That I'm really worried about. It's all over wild birds on the western part of the United States and going up in the north. It's getting into the poultry. We're seeing sporadic human cases, no human-to-human transmission yet, but that could happen. It's in the cattle, it's in the milk, and that's just the beginning. We have another major coronavirus likely brewing in Asia. We've had SARS in 2002, SARS-2, COVID-19 in 2019. And we know these viruses are jumping from bats to people thousands of times a year. But there's still more. We know that we have a big problem with mosquito-transmitted viruses all along the Gulf Coast, where I am here in Texas. So we're expecting dengue and possibly Zika virus coming back, or a Puche virus, maybe even yellow fever. And there's more. Then we have all this sharp rise in vaccine preventable diseases going up because of, in part, the anti-vaccine activism that's so prominent right now. We have a 5-fold rise in pertussis cases, whooping cough over the last year, 15 measles outbreaks this year. We've got polio that's been in the wastewater in New York State. All that's going to come crashing down on January 21st on the Trump administration. We need a really, really good team to be able to handle this.
This also has Leanna Wen discussing the need for testing regarding bird flu.
Well, that's exactly it. I don't want to wait for the Trump administration to potentially hold up the vaccines, saying that they want more evidence. Look, evidence is always good and facts are always good. New research is always good. But you also have to weigh that against a potential catastrophe, as we could be having for bird flu, the way that we had for COVID. There's no reason why we should hold off on getting more testing. We need to know how much bird flu there is out there. We need to know if there are new mutations that are being developed. Other countries also need to know so that they can prepare as well. And I think it's a major problem that in the US, we have been holding back on testing and also holding back on getting the vaccines deployed that are already developed.
Now, Leanna Wen has an interesting history. Here she is at the Boston bombing event.
The doctors, the EMTs, how are they coping in the aftermath? And what if they were missing their own relatives while they were saving the lives of those injured? Joining me now is Dr. Lena Wen. She's an emergency room physician who was working at Massachusetts General Hospital the day of the terror attack. She also works at Brigham and Women's Hospital. So you were at Massachusetts General Monday. What happened?
Oh, it was a horrific day. We had no idea what was coming. It was 3 o'clock and we heard that there were 2 explosions, but we didn't know where. We had no idea how many people were coming to us.
How many people came?
It seemed like dozens, and it was. It was probably nearly 3 dozen patients in 2 hours or so.
And was the hospital ready for it? I've heard from Dr. Walls from the other Brigham and Women's Hospital that because of all the drills the hospitals here have been running since 9/11, you were unbelievably prepared.
Technically and medically, we were ready. We had done drills. We knew what to do with each individual patient who came in. But I've never seen trauma like this before. The volume and the nature of the trauma was really chilling and really shocking.
And on a personal note, you hadn't yet heard from your husband while this was all going on, and then you hear a cell phone ring. You reach into your pocket, but it wasn't your cell phone ringing.
Yeah, so we actually live just a block away from here, from Copley Square. And my husband had told me that he was coming to watch at the finish line. And then we heard that the explosions happened. So while I was treating patients, I had no idea whether the next patient was going to be my husband. I really thought, because there was soot and blood everywhere, I thought there was a good chance that the next patient I'd be seeing on the stretcher would turn out to be my husband.
But he was okay.
He ended up being unharmed, but I couldn't reach him for hours because of phone lines being full and all these things. So.
One of the things that Dr. Walls told me is that he talked to his protege who works in Colorado and dealt with the Aurora shootings. Right. And he said, what's one piece of advice? And he said, We took care of our people, the emotional trauma that they felt, but you can always do more. It still wasn't enough. Have you found that, or are the doctors and nurses and others who work at the hospital, are they still dealing with this and struggling with it?
Absolutely. I know that. I certainly do. I have nightmares, and whenever I hear sirens or the loudspeaker for the ambulance going off, I think about Monday. And it's something that I know I have to do better at. I need to take care of myself and our colleagues in order for us to take care of our patients going forward too.
Well, thank you for the work you do, Dr. Wen, and I'm glad you're okay, and keep up the great work.
Thank you.
Now, I'm not going to say much more, as it will probably cost me my YouTube account, but I would advise you to watch this deep dive into the Boston bombing, and by the end of it, you'll have some serious questions about that event, namely the widespread use of realistic prosthetics, realistic rubber wound materials, the bizarre behaviour that day by the various participants. From that perspective, it makes sense why a deep state agent like Leana Wen is turning up at the Closer 2024 to warn us about bird flu. She played a pivotal role in the COVID event. My notes on 2024 is that humanity is in a long period of decline and barbarism. The bourgeoisie routinely burn food and clothes to maintain the overproduction crisis and the cruel rule of profit in our societies. During the Smovid event, they burned human bodies. I don't think we've hit the bottom of this barrel, but we are ruled by a cynical technocratic elite that believe in degrowth, which can't be anything except fascism. If humanity is to escape the rut and filth of bourgeois society, they'll have to rediscover Marx, Engels, Lenin and Stalin to emancipate humanity from these collection of ruling class parasites. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like, share and subscribe. See you in 2025.